Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and this is part two of the Hermetica. So, for those of you who are tuning in, and this is perhaps the first episode that you're listening to, this is the second part of a series that I'm doing on the teachings of Hermes and Hermetic philosophy. In the first part, we gave kind of an historical overview to the Hermetica. So you probably want to start there first to get all the good background information about the Hermetica. In this particular talk today, we're going to be looking at two topics from the first two chapters of the Hermetica. They are the topics of prophecy and initiation. I'll remind everybody of the text that I'm using. This is a copy of the Hermetica arranged by Timothy Freck and Peter Gandy. It's a Tarcher Cornerstone edition. I like this edition. It's good for beginners. So if you're someone who's had a lot of experience with Hermetic philosophy, or you've studied Hermetic philosophy already more in depth, you may feel that this book is too beginner. But I like it quite a bit because it has a way of taking a very complex philosophy, much of which was expressed in dialogue form, and it's broken down into short chapters covering core topics from the Hermetica in a more poetic style. So I really like that. I find it's both accessible and easily digestible. So I'm going to be reading today from two of the chapters. They're both very brief. You could follow along if you have a copy. And I'll be talking about the Prophecies of Hermes and the Initiation of Hermes. And well, let me put the PowerPoint up on the screen. So the main reason for doing this is to give students of astrology, or people who are just interested in astrology, an introduction to Hermetic philosophy. Why do this? Because Hermes Trismegistus was said to be the founder of astrology. And so the ancient astrologers associated the knowledge of astrology, the philosophy of astrology, you might even say the spiritual practice of astrology, with Hermes. And we also know, as we established in the first part of this series, that Hermetic philosophy is very, very old and has its roots in Egyptian mysticism. So knowing something about the Hermetica can do nothing but help you as a student of astrology, really help us get down to the spiritual core of our practice. Why do we do astrology? What is the spiritual benefit of astrology? What's our philosophical basis? So the Hermetica is a great text for exploring that and deepening that element of our studies of astrology. As we go each chapter, what we're going to do is just look at some of the major philosophical and spiritual takeaways from every section, and also just look at some of the ways in which the philosophy of Hermes may compare or contrast with some of our modern notions about astrology, some of our modern practices or beliefs. So that's where we're heading. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read the first portion. The first section we're reading is the very first chapter entitled The Prophecies of Hermes. So in this chapter, Hermes describes the nature of pure philosophy, but he also laments that in future generations it will become all but lost. So here's what he says. Pure philosophy is spiritual striving through constant contemplation to attain true knowledge of Atum, the one God. But speaking now in prophecy, I say that in times to come, no one will pursue philosophy with single-mindedness and purity of heart. Those with a grudging and ungenerous temperament will try and prevent men discovering the priceless gift of immortality. Philosophy will become confused, making it hard to comprehend. It will be corrupted by spurious speculation. It will be entangled with bewildering sciences like arithmetic, music, and geometry. The student of pure philosophy studies the sciences not as fanciful theories, but as devotion to Atum, because they reveal a universe perfectly ordered by the power of number. because measuring the depths of the sea and forces of fire and magnitudes of physical things leads to a reverent awe at the Creator's skill and wisdom. Because the mysteries of music bear witness to the unsurpassed talent of the supreme artist, who has beautifully harmonized all things into a single whole, suffused with sweet melodies. To simply love Atum in thought, with singleness of heart, and to follow the goodness of his will, this is philosophy, unsullied by intrusive cravings for pointless opinions. But I foresee that in times to come, clever intellectuals will mislead the minds of men, turning them away from pure philosophy. It will be taught that our sacred devotion was ineffectual, and the heartfelt piety and assiduous service with which we Egyptians honor Atum was a waste without reward. Egypt is an image of the heavens, and the whole cosmos dwells here, in this its sanctuary. But the gods will desert the earth and return to heaven, abandoning this land that was once the home of spirituality. Egypt will be forsaken and desolate, bereft of the presence of the gods. It will be overrun by foreigners who will neglect our sacred ways. This holy land of temples and shrines will be filled with corpses and funerals. The sacred Nile will be swollen with blood, and her waters will rise utterly fouled with gore. Does this make you weep? There is worse to follow. This land that was a spiritual teacher to all humankind, which loved the gods with such devotion that they deigned to sojourn here on earth, this land will exceed all others in cruelty. The dead will far outnumber the living, and the survivors will be known as Egyptians by their language alone, for in their actions they will be like men of another race. O Egypt, nothing will remain of your religion but an empty tale, which even your own children will not believe. Nothing will be left to tell of your wisdom but old graven stones. Men will be weary of life and will cease seeing the universe as worthy of reverent wonder. Spirituality, the greatest of all blessings, will be threatened with extinction and believed a burden to be scorned. The world will no longer be loved as an incomparable work of Atum, a glorious monument to his primal goodness, an instrument of the divine will to evoke veneration and praise in the beholder. Egypt will be widowed, every sacred voice will be silenced, darkness will be preferred to light, no eyes will raise to heaven. The pure will be thought insane, and the impure will be honored as wise. The madman will be believed brave, and the wicked esteemed as good. Knowledge of the immortal soul will be laughed at and denied. No reverent words worthy of heaven will be heard or believed. So I, thrice great Hermes, the first of men to attain all knowledge, have inscribed the secret of the gods in sacred symbols and holy hieroglyphs on these stone tablets, which I have concealed for a future world that may seek our sacred wisdom. Through all-seeing mind, I myself have been the witness of the invisible things of heaven, and through contemplation come to knowledge of the truth. This knowing I have set down in these writings. So this is the first chapter of the Hermetica, at least as Freck and Gandhi have outlined it, and it's a good starting place. First of all, Hermes starts by saying that the philosophy that he espouses is about the contemplation of divinity. The exact words that he uses, one more time, pure philosophy is spiritual striving through constant contemplation to attain true knowledge of Atum, the one God. So I think this is interesting for a few reasons. One is that the word striving and the word contemplation are ongoing activities that involve a subject that is in some ways impenetrable, not able to be circumscribed by the mind. This is not a science in some kind of empirical sense, whether it's the philosophy, the spiritual philosophy, cosmology, or astrology, all of which are contained in the Hermetica. We're approaching something that we're being told that we're to approach all forms of sacred science or philosophy as a way of getting to know something that is ultimately personal. And this spiritual striving and constant contemplation. And you compare and contrast that to the way that sometimes in this day and age we think of anything from science to even something like astrology sometimes as something that will help us to grasp or hold or possess some kind of power. Well, I know the truth, or I have certainty about something. So Hermes tells us that pure philosophy is spiritual striving through constant contemplation to attain true knowledge of Atum, the one God. So this is also a reminder for us that astrologers, the first reason that we're doing astrology has to do with the quality of thought that it provides us with and a shift in consciousness that it creates. It's as though our birth charts, all the events that are happening in a birth chart, all the things we talk about in the day-to-day, all the forecasting, in some ways, it's not really about what's going to happen. That's a part of it. It's not really about what your birth chart says. It's a part of it. But at a deeper level, what all of these things are doing is to provide us with an opportunity for that constant contemplation. We're going to come back around to this in a minute. Hermes goes on to say that this philosophy will become confused and will devolve into endless speculation. People will, through a grudging and ungenerous temperament, will try to prevent people from discovering the priceless gift of immortality. And then, of course, much of the chapter has to do with the degradation of spiritual philosophy and things like astrology that will happen in time. This is good for us to know because although astrology is still here in the world, it's not popular among scientists or in great intellectuals. It's not popular in universities. It's not taken seriously by people. Well, largely, it's seen as ignorant, superstitious. Maybe it fits into the category of religion, but actually, many religions actually reject astrology as well. It's natural that if we're contemplating higher things, if astrology is teaching us a way of seeing our everyday life and the changes around us as a part of something transcendental, it's no wonder that people who are more attached to the things of this world, to the everyday material fluctuations of life, would be threatened by the call to see something higher or something more, because it requires a leap of faith, and it also requires on some level letting go of our attachments to material things as if they are all that matters or all that exists. So, but Hermes predicts that in time, people who study philosophy or astrology are going to have a more difficult time. He also says that philosophy itself will become confused and will devolve into endless speculation. I think about this right now in terms of the quality of knowledge, information, and the regular dialogue that you see every day. At least I do, as someone who's on social media quite a bit. And think about the phenomenon of fake news. There's this sense that nothing can really be trusted. Everything is ultimately personal opinion. There is no objective truth. Everyone's opinion is as good as everyone else's. Anyone is an expert. Everyone is an expert. Any truth could be true. Do you know what I mean? So Hermes also tells us that the search for absolute reality, the search for divinity, the search for truth, beauty, order, justice, real transcendental knowledge, that the search for these things will also fall out of favor in the world, and it will, not only that, it might be attacked, it might be prevented, people will be disturbed if you talk about these things. And I know that this is true just simply even within my own certain elements of my own family, who I love. But there's certain occasions where talking about astrology makes people uncomfortable. And Hermes tells us several thousand years ago that this is where things are heading. Now, he also tells us that, again, spiritual philosophy is done out of devotion. And so I also find it interesting that, don't you find it a little interesting that so many people in the world are religious and believe in God? And yet so many people who, again, are religious sometimes believe that astrology is not something that can be done in a devotional mood, or it's something that it's separate. It's some kind of, sometimes people even say it's a dark form of magic or something like that. So being people who are interested in astrology in the modern world is not an easy thing. But it's nice to read the Hermetica because it reminds us that this is the way that things will likely go. And we see this pretty commonly among ancient astrologers, this idea that things are not going to evolve in a good direction necessarily. So we'll talk about that more in just a minute. Hermes also tells us in this chapter that the universe is ordered, but studying it doesn't lead to some kind of grasp, command, power. It doesn't lead to, how do I use it to benefit me? How do I get something out of it for myself? The universe is ordered, but studying it leads to awe and reverence. Hermes also says that God's creation is musical and that it helps us when we recognize the musical nature of creation, the beautiful harmony of the spheres. It helps us to recognize the supreme artist. So the same thing is there. Why do we study astrology really? What's the very most basic reason that we study astrology? It's because when we see the harmony, when we hear the music of the spheres, we also have evidence of a divine intelligence. And we start to see that in everything. It means we start to commune with it. It starts to enter our heart, and that changes our consciousness. Hermes tells us that eventually true devotional spiritual philosophy will be thought of as ineffectual, a waste without reward. But what does that tell us about our modern world that we live in? Well, sometimes even in the realm of astrology, of course, we see this everywhere in the material sense, materialistic people who just are thinking about nothing but themselves and what I can get, what I want, what I desire, what I don't want, what I'm averse to. We also see this in astrology where sometimes people think the point is to get more deeply invested and identified with my birth chart. It's my birth chart. It's that birth chart is all about me and my life and what's going to happen. And sometimes we take astrology as an opportunity to get more deeply invested in the stories, the very temporary stories of our everyday life that so frequently are nothing more than idle chatter, the realm of speculation and opinion that Hermes is telling us to be very careful of. The mind and heart are made happy when dwelling upon the eternal subjects of life, the harmony of the spheres, the beautiful patterns that we see unfolding in life through the archetypes of the planets. These thought forms fill us with something higher, and they take us out of that idle, kind of the mind that is like a hamster on the wheel, just going round and round about things that really don't matter, the Twitter feed in our head. So true devotional spiritual philosophy will be thought of as ineffectual, a waste without reward. Sometimes we also see this in terms of a criticism that is leveled at people who are spiritual. Sometimes it's said, if you're living a spiritual life, then you're spiritually bypassing the world. Now, sometimes, of course, people use anything as an escape from the realities of the world, and the realities of the world are part of what we're here to experience. But there is something about spirituality that does help us to bypass something. And what Hermes is telling us is that the contemplation of heavenly things helps us to bypass unnecessary entanglement with the idle chatter and gossip of the mind. And inevitably, the things that end up entangling us in the world start in the mind. So there is a sense in which Hermes and ancient astrologers were telling us this whole science exists so that by seeing the patterns of the world, by seeing reflected in the changes in the world something of a higher order, you may start to hear the music and pass through this world with a little less entanglement. And the entanglement is thought to generate a deep form of suffering. And this is covered in later portions of the Hermetica as well. But Hermes goes on in the chapter to say things are not going to evolve in a positive direction for the spiritual philosopher. Knowledge of the immortal soul will be laughed at and denied. Contrast this with another idea that's quite common today, which is that we're on the cusp of a new age. Everyone's awakening. Everything is heading in a good direction. And sometimes the mood in astrology too, which is an astrologer is here to tell you how great you are and how wonderful you're evolving and everything is evolving. And sometimes the encouragement obviously can be a good thing to keep us on our spiritual path. But sometimes the encouragement, like the investment that I was just talking about in the future, what's going to happen to me? What does my chart say? Oh my gosh, getting overly using astrology as an entryway into the complexities and entanglement of the material world. We can also think of all the positivity and all of everything's evolving in a positive manner as sometimes a gateway into the same kind of self-involvement and the same kind of idle speculation. Ancient astrologers, and Hermes certainly throughout the Hermetica, has a very stark view of where things are heading, considered to be moving into a dark age for the most part, not a light age. But to be fair, ancient mystics, and especially throughout the Hermetica, you will see belief in an alternation of light and dark in the material universe. And this is said to be a kind of endless cycling. And so getting attached to growth can be just as dangerous as getting attached to darkness or despair. So that's something else to think about when we see, on the surface, it sounds like, oh, it's kind of dark. It's kind of fatalistic. The Prophecies of Hermes sounds like everything's going to hell, Yes, but remember that this universe was thought of as a cycling of heavenly and hellish experiences round and round, because material experiences are impermanent and keep changing all the time. So you'll find that in the Hermetica, the spiritual mission, you might say, is not attached to growth in any literal or material sense. And in that way, it can be a little different than some of the New Age positivism that we hear a lot in astrology today. Hermes does leave us with a ray of hope, though. Hermes says that there will be a future world in which people may seek out and once again remember this sacred knowledge, and he's concealing the knowledge in the meantime. So this first chapter is, it's very deep. Let's go into the second chapter now, which is the Initiation of Hermes. I'm going to read for you guys again. The Initiation of Hermes. My senses were suspended in mystic sleep, not a weary, full-fed drowsiness, but an alert and conscious emptiness. Released from my body, I flew with my thoughts, and while I soared, it seemed to me a vast and boundless being called my name. Hermes, what are you looking for? Who are you? I asked. I am the way guide, the supreme mind, the thoughts of Atum, the one God. I am with you, always and everywhere. I know your desires. Make your questions conscious, and they will be answered. Show me the nature of reality. Bless me with knowledge of Atum, I begged. Suddenly, everything changed before me. Reality was opened out in a moment. I saw the boundless view. All became dissolved in light, united within one joyous love. Yet the light cast a shadow, grim and terrible, which, passing downwards, became like restless water, chaotically tossing forth spume like smoke. And I heard an unspeakable lament, an inarticulate cry of separation. The light then uttered a word which calmed the chaotic waters. My guide asked, "Do you understand the secrets of this vision? I am that light, the mind of God, which exists before the chaotic dark waters of potentiality. My calming word is the Son of God, the idea of beautiful order, the harmony of all things with all things. Primal mind is parent of the word, just as in your own experience, your human mind gives birth to speech. They cannot be divided one from the other, for life is the union of mind and word. Now fix your attention upon the light and become one with it." When he had said this, he looked into me, eye to eye, until trembling I saw and thought limitless power within the light, to form an infinite yet ordered world, and I was amazed. I saw in the darkness of the deep chaotic water without form, permeated with a subtle, intelligent breath of divine power. Autumn's word fell on the fertile waters, making them pregnant with all forms. Ordered by the harmony of the word, the four elements came into being, combining to create the brood of living creatures. The fiery element was articulated as the constellations of the stars and the gods of the seven heavenly bodies, revolving forever in celestial circles. The word then leapt up from the elements of nature and reunited with mind, the maker, leaving mere matter devoid of intelligence. My guide said, "You have perceived the boundless primal idea, which is before the beginning. By Autumn's will, the elements of nature were born as reflections of this primal thought in the waters of potentiality. These are the primary things, the prior things, the first principles of all in the universe. Autumn's word is the creative idea, the supreme limitless power, which nurtures and provides for all the things that through it are created. I have shown you everything. Why do you wait? Write the wisdom you have understood in hieroglyphic characters, carved on stone in the holy sanctuary. Make yourself a spiritual guide to those worthy of the gift of knowledge, so that through you Autumn may save humankind." I was overwhelmed with gratitude to the All-Father who had graced me with the supreme vision. In awe and reverence I prayed, "Please never let me fall away from this knowledge of your being, so that I may enlighten those who are in darkness." Then with his power in me I began to speak. The aloof laughed at my words, but others knelt at my feet. I told them to stand and receive the seeds of wisdom, which I will sow in you with these teachings. So listen, men of clay. If you do not pay keen attention, my words will fly past you and wing their way back to the source from which they come. So that's the second chapter on the initiation of Hermes. And there's another great series of takeaways from this portion as well. How do we come into knowledge of astrology? Sometimes we have teachers, there's online classes, there's books, right? There's research. For a while now, I've been doing an interview series called Astrologers in Profile. And during each episode of this series, I speak with astrologers and hear their story about their personal story about how they came to astrology. Most every story about someone falling in love with astrology involves an initiation. An initiation is a personal experience, first and foremost. It's not an academic experience. It's not an intellectual experience. It's a calling. And we rarely spend time enough with that call. We don't spend enough time recognizing the voice, the personal connection that calls us to astrology, that touches our heart, that opens our mind somehow. Hermes has a mystical experience that becomes the basis of everything that he shares in the teachings of the Hermetica. But it's a personal experience. It's a vision, but it's a personal vision. It's not just, here's how it works, now I'll tell you. It's not an objectification. There is an objective reality, in a sense, that Hermes is describing. But the nature of what he's describing is also personal and subjective. So the two go together. Hermes begs to be shown the nature of reality. There's something about this that I think is very important for us as astrologers today. One, it tells us that no matter how many charts we do or how many classes we take, that if the spirit of devotion, contemplation, spiritual striving, and in a sense, the begging of the heart, please show me more. This is so beautiful. Please show me more. That earnest, authentic, sincere inquiry is at the heart of how the mystical transmission comes through to Hermes. Why would he share that with us? If not in some ways giving us a hint of the mood we might need to assume as we also aspire for a true vision, as we also aspire to try to learn something that at the end of the day can never really be mastered, just like you can't fully circumscribe the divine with your head. So studying astrology starts, the initiation is personal, and it's something that we have to seek and continue to strive for in the heart. And that continual striving and seeking is what makes astrology a spiritual lifestyle and a spiritual practice that can sustain a life and not just a skill to be mastered or learned. This is also why, by the way, one of my favorite soapbox issues, why I'm very passionate about teaching people ancient astrology, because to me, I wasn't satisfied with everything that I had been told in modern astrology, much of which was purely psychological, or much of which was, books where people were outlining everything you needed to know. And I didn't feel the spirit of inquiry or mystery. And I felt like there were far too many questions I had that were left unanswered. I think ancient astrology really helps us in that respect. At any rate, Hermes asks to be shown the nature of reality. He sees the material universe as an emanation from God, but it's also described as a shadow, and there's a pain involved in its birth. Well, let's go back to that passage one time, because it's really beautiful. Reality was opened before me in a moment. I saw the boundless view, all became dissolved in light, united within one joyous love. Yet the light cast a shadow, grim and terrible, which passing downwards became like restless water, chaotically tossing forth spume like smoke. And I heard an unspeakable lament, an inarticulate cry of separation. The depiction of the birth of the material universe here is one of the pain of separation. Also, it's thought of as a dark shadow of something original or divine, and this is really the starting point. Then what happens is the universe is ordered from a chaotic sea of potentiality by what Hermes says is called the Word. The Word, the Logos, is also called the Son of God and the harmony of all things with all things. The primal mind is said to be the parent of the Word, so they're different, but they can't be divided either. They're separate or different, but same or joined. So they form a kind of dyad. You could think of it as source and some kind of emanation from the source that comes into the material creation and sort of impregnates it. It's very interesting. The Word falls upon the fertile waters of the primordial universe and impregnates it with all forms. The four elements come into being. Their combinations create all living beings. And the element of fire in particular was articulated. That is an evidence of language. Element of fire is articulating as the constellations of the stars and the gods of the seven heavenly bodies, quote, revolving forever in celestial circles. Remember what Plato says about the movements of the zodiac and everything in it, talking about time. Time is the moving image of eternity. So it's very interesting that the element of fire is associated with the articulation of constellations, stars, and astrology. Interestingly, the Babylonians, whose astral omen divination came prior to the birth of horoscopic astrology, also believed that the sky was a form of heavenly writing, an articulation or a language that could be read as the mind, will, or intentions of a higher supreme intelligence, the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Remember, we talked last week about the commonalities between the Hermetic philosophy and the opening part of the Gospel of John, which is very interesting. The Word then leaps out of material creation after doing its work of ordering and reunites with mind the maker, leaving matter devoid of intelligence. The universe at this point thus bears the resemblance of divinity, having been ordered by the Word. And in this way, we start to see some of the similarities with Platonic philosophy and cosmologies, very similar to Pythagorean doctrines as well, which is this idea that the material universe comes from God, is an emanation from God, bears the resemblance or is a reflection of God, but also a shadowy place that involves the pain of separation. It's filled with order, the harmony of harmony, the harmony of all things. It is good and suffused with God's light, but also something of this grim separateness is a part of the way in which things are conceived here. And you think it's not a whole lot different than human birth, is it? There's pain of separation involved. You see how this natural picture of birth and life is, in a sense, being related to the natural image of creation. So this is the beginning of the outlining of the cosmology of the Hermetica, and the ordering that we see at the very beginning, the thing that gives us that sense of the divine order or the logos at the highest level, and also subtlest, is fire, where the articulation of the heavens, the constellations, the zodiac is related to the element of fire, which was thought of as the sort of subtlest or highest up of the elements, and could connect us back to that eternal image that's built into everything. So Hermes is then instructed to tell others what he has seen in order to enlighten them, and some listen and some do not. What would be enlightening about this story? Why go and tell people? Why does Autumn tell Hermes that this will save people? This will enlighten them through you and through your translation, being a messenger, which Hermes is so like to be. What would the benefit be? Well, here we have it spelled out perfectly. By showing people this vision, you help them remember that there is a higher order, that there is a governing intelligence, that this world bears the mark of something divine, eternal, loving, unified. Because so often here in this world, we see things through the cyclings of opposites, and we keep reliving the pain of separation. We keep reliving that pain of separation. What does it mean to become an individuated human being? This will become the topic of many of the upcoming chapters of the Hermetica. Studying astrology is part of how we become individuated. It's part of how we become whole unto ourselves. This is why Carl Jung, great modern pioneer of depth psychology, this is why I believe he also really loved the Hermetica. Because as we study the archetypes, the patterns in mind and psyche, through the heavens, in life, and we're able to predict their coming and going, we rise above the platform of idle speculation, of opinions, of Twitter feeds, and of getting so lost in all of this coming and going. Because the world here is impermanent and everything is always changing, It's very easy to constantly be grasping, where do I find that shelter? Where do I find that sense of stability or centeredness or peace or satisfaction or happiness? Where is it? Well, what Hermes tells us over time is learn to see the heavenly things reflected in all of these changes and vacillations. And then when everything constantly changes and you can't hold on to anything, you'll suddenly find that there is no need to hold on to anything, that you're being held. You'll find also yourself. You'll find your true self. And that will become a place from which to stand and feel confident as a soul. Becoming an ensouled being is a process. Even though we have a soul, coming to understand that that's who we are is a work. And the spiritual process of astrology, again, really in some ways has very little to do with getting too wrapped up in what's going to happen, or am I going to evolve and get the right relationship, or am I going to evolve and get the best job, or it's a deeper, more contemplative process than that. So we'll leave it there. In the upcoming talks, we're going to be looking at a few other chapters. The being of Atum and contemplate creation will be the next talk that we'll do. I'm not sure if I'll get it done before I leave for India or not. I'm leaving for India next week. So if I don't get it done before then, we'll do it when I get back. I hope that this was entertaining, food for thought, food for soul. And remember, you can always pick up a copy of this book and follow along. It's brilliant reading. I think it makes a great, shelf companion. If I were Marie Kondo and I had only 30 books to keep, I would keep the copy of the Hermetica because it definitely sparks joy. All right, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.